What is child sexual abuse?
Child sex abuse can't be answered that simply because I make an analogy to cancer. 20 years ago, you heard the word cancer and thought of just one horrible disease. Now we know it's everything from, sarcoma to melanoma, and similarly, child sex abuse can range from something as seemingly simple as an unwanted touch to ongoing multiple rape. So one of our challenges in educating folks about child sex abuse is really to recognize what a broad range of behaviors it can encompass.
And it doesn't always encompass touching.
It may not encompass touching. It may encompass speaking to kids in language that scares them to death or make them feel uncomfortable. It may involve sharing pornographic images with a child that make them confused and uncomfortable. There's lots of talk now about how safe it is for kids to be online and the way we can exploit kids electronically. So it's not just face-to-face or touching.
Is there an age where a child is most likely to be victimized or to suffer abuse?
I'm going to answer that sort of in a roundabout way. The factors that lead to a child being abused have to do with what's going on in the family, what's going on in the community, what's going on in the institutions or organizations where they work. So the characteristics of the kid in and of himself is not going to necessarily predict. Having said that, when we look at where a kid is developmentally, kids go through a phase kind of in grade school, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, that is referred to as the latency phase, where things sexual are totally not in their realm. When they're real little, we catch them playing with their genitals. When they turn into teens, they want to look at other people's genitals. But when they're in that latency phase, sex is, so when a kid is in that latency phase, that may be a period where they're less likely to respond in a negative or frightful way to a touch that's getting gradually more sexual because they're not processing things as a sexual way, kind of in that mid to late grade school age.
I think one of the most troubling things is that in 90% of cases, the child knows the abuser.
Yeah, people debate the statistics. The overwhelming majority of children know the abuser. The abuser's not a stranger, and that's absolutely true, which is one reason why I believe that one of the most protective and preventative thing a parent can do is know everything they can about every relationship their child is having with an adult, or if it's a little kid, with a teen, right? Because there are many cases that come up retrospectively of the 7-year-old remembers being abused by the 14-year-old babysitter, and we don't think to keep an eye on those relationships as well.
And that's a key point, that abusers are not always adults.
Absolutely, abusers are not always adults. That's the sad news. The good news is, if you can call it that the adolescents that experience those kinds of behaviors, negative behaviors, are the most treatable. The researchers refer to having static risk factors, meaning that's just that's with you now, and dynamic risk factors. And the adolescents who tend to be the sexual abusers tend to be impulse driven. They just didn't think. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And the kids that act out in that way with dynamic risk factors are really, there's very, very good research on how treatable those folks are.
And in talking about teens specifically, especially when they get into dating relationships, I would think that can be sort of a fine line because they're not really sure what's appropriate behavior within a relationship. So what would be some sort of guidelines for teenagers who, may think, oh, well, this is normal. My partner's, pressuring me or doing these things to me I'm not comfortable with, but I don't know any better.
I'm a real fan of being prepared. Like, before you come across a situation, think about how you're going to behave when that situation gets here. Like, before you become a parent, think about your style of parenting. And if you're married, you do that with your partner. Similarly, before a teen becomes sexually active, in my ideal world, this would be the kind of conversation they could have with a parent, or a lot of faith-based communities offer groups for kids where they can work to clarify their own values and their own morals, so that when they find themselves in kind of an adolescent clutching and hormones doing things to parts of their body they never even knew they had before, their brain already knows what it is they've decided to do. So one of the best ways to be prepared for the coming adolescent behaviors is to start from the time a kid is young and talk about what kind of touch is okay in our family. What, how do we feel about different kinds of things? What are your boundaries and how are you going to hold them?